Hello again, everyone. We seem to have quite a few people on the air right now to watch our webinar on keys to cost-effective cap and trade compliance strategy. Welcome again to that webinar series on cap and trade compliance. CCG's opinions, of course, and content provided during this webinar is for the sole purpose of our listeners, and we assume limited responsibility for the completeness and usefulness of the information we are about to provide you. My name is Jean Paquin. I'll be your host again today. This third webinar, part of the fourth part of webinar series on keys to cost-efficient compliance strategy, is being recorded, and we will likely be able to upload the video for you to review at a later stage on our website. We will provide you the information at a convenient time. The webinar will last for about 40 to 45 minutes and will include 10 to 15 minutes of questions period at the end of the webinar. Please ask your questions at any time using the Q&A box provided to you, and we will answer them at the end of the webinar. And since there's a lot of participants today, we will be sending you likely the Q&A follow-up that we usually do after webinars that you have access to, and you'll be able to see some of the answers to the most common questions asked during the webinar. With me today, we have again Carbon Consult Group expert David Beaudoin, who has long-standing expertise in the carbon world for the carbon market compliance to quantification of GHG emissions reduction for various types of projects. Hello, David.
Hello, Jean. Thank you very much for having me with you this morning.
Good. It's nice to see you again, David. Today's webinar will address, we'll just change the slide. So here we go, the objectives of today. It will be mandatory and voluntary participants as well as non-participants of GHG emitters, which are indirectly impacted by the cap and trade regulation. Now, let's dive into the core topics of today. With the new year underway, the long debated cap and trade program has finally come into effect with direct impact on industrial sectors in Ontario. And while many companies foresee an increase in the costs of producing goods and services, others see this as an opportunity to do things differently and perform better than their competition. So our goal today is to provide you with the lessons learned from the first auction, Ontario auction results, which took place last month on March 22nd, and provide you insights into the dynamics of carbon market. The second objective of today will be to, of course, discuss about the role of GHG offsets in the cap and trade as part of your compliance strategy. So key important dates to remember: on April 26th, so next week, on 26 and 27, there will be the Cap and Trade Forum in Toronto. We will be taking part of this forum and proud to be there on the 26th and 27th to host a panel of experts. I'll be hosting a panel of experts from different large organizations. And we will discuss about the lessons learned from Quebec with respect to the cap and trade market. And hopefully this will be interesting for everyone to attend. On May 8th, take note that there will be a second auction application deadline, second Ontario auction. On June 1st is the deadline for submitting your GHG emissions report covering 2016. And finally, on June 6th, from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Time, there will be the second auction, Ontario auction on carbon market will take place. So without further ado, I will leave David to continue with this webinar presentation. Please, David.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jean. Thank you, everybody, for being or attending this webinar this morning. As Jean just mentioned, two very different topics we will address today. One being an overview and analysis of the recent results of the auction that occurred on March 22nd. And then we'll be discussing, as we received a lot of comments and questions regarding GHG offsets, so we'll be discussing how these offsets can be used as part of your overall cap-and-trade compliance strategy. So before we start looking at the results of the last auction, here are some of the key advices that we provided at our last webinar that was prepared to help market participants to prepare for the first auction. And some of the advices that we had for the participants were the following. First, essentially was to participate at the auction because many organizations were still wondering whether they should wait at a later stage to participate in their first auction, and mainly act as an observer at the beginning of the market itself. And we strongly encouraged most of our organizations to take part and actively take part in that auction and do place bids because opportunities in that market don't come very often, and when there is an opportunity, you better be prepared in order to grab that opportunity to reduce your overall cost of compliance. So that was one of the main recommendations. We also recommended to place various bids. Many organizations that we dealt with in the past and that we're still dealing with today still made the same mistakes of placing a single bid when they participate on the auction, usually at the reserve price, so the minimal price that they can place a bid on. And we always recommend to actually place several bids to make sure that they are not left with a shortage of allowances at the end of the auction period. And then finally, one of the recommendations that we had was to consider future vintages to acquire at that auction. So now when we look at the results of the recent auction, one of the main things that we observe is we first look at the reserve price. So the minimal price that you were able to place a bid on was $18.07 Canadian dollars, which was slightly above the previous auction on the Quebec and California market, which was at $17.84. So essentially, the exchange rate between the Canadian and US dollars did change a bit during that month between the Quebec California auction and the first Ontario auction, which drove that floor price or that reserve price a little bit up. What we do observe also is that the final price or the settlement price of the auction, at least for the current auction or vintage 2017, was 1 cent above the reserve price, which is not much, but which reinforces the importance of placing several bids and not only a single bid at the reserve price. And we are in touch with some organizations who did that mistake, and unfortunately were left with with a shortage of allowances. One other main aspect or main fact of that auction is 100% of all allowances available for the vintage 2017 were sold, as opposed to what previously happened on the Quebec California auction, where only 18% of all available allowances were sold due to various factors. In the Ontario market, everything was sold, at least for the current auction, which is a good signal that participants are willing to be active, to comply to their obligations, and to be part of the market. Nearly 50 participants had registered to that auction and actively placed bids, which clearly is not the total numbers of participants on the market, but is a significant number. Of the 25 million units of allowances that were placed for 2017, they were all sold, and about 4 million of the bids placed for that vintage were left unfulfilled. Essentially, that mainly says that there is an over demand as compared to the supply for that auction for the vintage 2017. What is also important to consider is that there was also an advance auction, as they call it, placing for sale allowances of vintage 2020. Now, this brings us back to one of the main recommendations that we had at the previous webinar, that was to consider the purchase of future vintages, and especially in this year of 2017, because the future vintages being sold, that is the vintage 2020, can be used for compliance purposes in the first compliance period. And this is a rare opportunity for participants to acquire current vintages and future vintages and use them towards the exact same compliance needs. So essentially, the 2020 vintage can be used just like the 2017 vintages can be used. And the fact that only 26% of all the 2020 vintages were sold clearly demonstrate that some or most of the organization didn't see that opportunity for them to place a bid in the advance auction and benefit from that opportunity to purchase allowances at the exact same price, or in that case, 1 cent below the current auction price, and avoid being left with a shortage of allowances. So the 4 million bids that were unfulfilled, at least half of them, or 2.3 million, could have been replaced with the 2020 vintage that were left unsold. So this is precisely why we recommended to consider 2020 vintage, and clearly many organizations did skip that opportunity for them to acquire allowances. Now, as we do in every webinar that we held, we also show a trend of the recent or the previous settlement price at the different auction. What we see here are prices on the auctions that were held for the Quebec and California market, and the very first auction in Ontario is shown here with the green bars on the very last column, and essentially what we see is a very slight difference in the price from the California market or compared with the newly in place Ontario market, essentially, as I mentioned before, due to the exchange rate that varied over the month that was separating those two auctions. Now, for the second topic of this webinar, we will address, or we will speak about GHG offset credits. GHG offset credits are one of the type of allowances that can be used to comply to the cap and trade obligations for market participants, and is one of the various acquisition channels of allowances. So some participants, some of you have received free allowances from the government. Some are participating at the auctions. There is also direct government sale that shall occur once or twice a year. There's also trading with other participants and trading on an exchange platform. Those are all different acquisition channels that you can use to get your allowances, and one of them are the GHG offsets. And again, many have approached us and asked us several questions regarding those, so we've decided to discuss it a little bit further during this webinar. But one of the main recommendations that we keep saying is for you to come up with a very efficient strategy to comply to the cap and trade and reduce the overall cost and minimize the risk, considering all of the different options that are shown here, is one of the main key to put in place an effective strategy. So GHG offset credits. So essentially, an offset credit can be used to cover 1 ton of CO2 emissions, just like any other allowances. So you're using one offset credit just like you would use one allowance to cover 1 ton of emission. The main difference between the two is that there is a limit of usage of offset credits. They are limited to cover up to 8% of your total GHG emissions. Due to that limitation, usually the price of acquisition of offset credits is usually a little bit below the price of allowances, mainly due to that limitation in its usage. That being said, there is a very limited supply of those GHG offset, both on the Ontario market, and that was the case, and it's still the case also on the Quebec and California market. There are very few projects being able to generate offsets. There are few protocols, we will discuss those on the next slides, that allow the creation or the generation of offsets, really making the supply of GHG offset credits very minimal. On the Ontario market, the government is expecting to have 14 types of projects being able to generate offset credits. So these projects that reduce GHG emissions that are not covered by the cap and trade include landfill gas capture and destruction, mine methane capture and destruction, ozone depleting substances capture and destruction, and 11 other type of projects. These three have been made a priority by the government, and they expect to have these protocols up and ready to be used by project proponents to generate offsets by the end of this year. So essentially, we are likely not to expect any trade or acquisition of offset credits on the Ontario market before the year 2018. That being said, one of the main recommendations that we have is for you to include the GHG offsets within your overall cap and trade compliance strategy. One of the recommendations is not to wait until these offsets actually come to the market. And the reason for that is essentially because project proponents, even if the protocols are not set yet and are not completely defined, they are already at work identifying their opportunities to develop some projects that will be able to generate offset credits, and they are already in the mood of preparing for the implementation of those projects, as well as finding potential buyers and purchasers of the assets to be created. So most of the main recommendations that we have is be active on the market right away. Don't wait for 2018. Try to get in touch with project proponents from various sectors, including forestry, agriculture, waste management, etc. All those sectors that will be able to generate offsets based on the approved protocols. And don't use a wait and see approach, as many have done in the past and are still doing in the Ontario market, because again, the opportunities that arise in that market, they arise from nurturing relationship with project proponents or traders. So essentially, what we're saying is, do take any opportunity that you have to be in touch with other participants, learn from their reality, ask if they are in the trading mood, if they have some additional allowances or offsets to trade, and do take all opportunities that you have to be able to network and interact with other participants.
Okay, well, thank you very much, David, for this great speech and discussion over the auction and the opportunities in the Ontario market and the cap and trade. market in the compliance strategy, surely there's great opportunity for, and we would encourage organization to be in touch with market participants and offset proponents. And of course, our next event on the Cap and Trade Forum next week, on April 26, 27, will be very interesting because, as we know, we already have an idea of who will be present and taking part of the event. There's surely going to be lots of interesting proponents and participants that would share their strategy and share their approach to this new challenge on the Ontario market. Again, I'll be chair there on one of the panel, I think in the afternoon at 1 o'clock, on the lessons learned from Quebec, and we'll be discussing with some interesting parties such as Glencore. We'll be talking with Gas Metro, with Resolute, and also with Suncor. And we'll be asking them basically questions on what were their lessons, what were their approach, what were their strategy, and we'll be discussing and sharing this with the public. So it's a great opportunity to address concerns and strategies for compliance. We also have a discount for any of the participants by using the Carbon Consult 20 promo code. You can get a 20% discount on the registration. Keys to an effective compliance strategy. Well, I think it was quite clear. We mentioned in the mindset of a long-term overall strategy, you got to look at all possible options to comply. There's, of course, the carbon market, but there's other opportunities. There's other venues. There's other ways to go around putting together your strategy for compliance. You get in touch, like we said before, you got to get in touch with market participants. You got to share experiences. This is a relatively new activity, a new challenge for organization, and some have had the opportunity to deal with it in a more, perhaps in a more thorough manner, and would be available to provide experiences on how they have approached that strategy. Also, a chance to exchange on possible transaction as buyer and or sellers are also selling offset, or buyers have opportunity to promote other projects and look for other allowances. Third point, network with offset credit proponent. We talk about that. We see that very often. Talking to some of the credit proponents is a great opportunity to understand their reality and also their opportunities that can be presented to some of the companies that are willing to negotiate or strategize outside the carbon market. Fourth point, monitor market signals. So that's kind of important, of course. Right now, market, and we've seen in the past week, markets have been up and down. Some people, even here in Quebec, were saying, well, how come how come the market is going down, and how come the market is not being a challenge, and allowances are not being purchased? Is that due to the California dynamic over the lawsuit by some of the companies over the state lawsuit that was put together a few months back? Well, yes and no. We think there is, of course, a lot of synergy around this lawsuit and the uncertainty, the viability of the carbon market. But we surely think this is not going to be the case, and we surely understand that at one point in time, these activities are going to have to, want it or not, to be back on the agenda, and that will force companies that have waited and taken a waiting and see attitude to be challenged in taking last-minute decisions. That's never a good advice. Again, plan ahead, know what you will need, and look at the market trends. And those are the keys on the effective compliance for smart planning and strategy. No further ado, what we do, you have it there, and we hopefully want to help you in cost-effective compliance plan as well. We have quite a lot of expertise in Quebec, of course, and want to share that with the Ontario participants, and we do on a regular basis. So we invite you to contact us on a regular basis, to keep in touch with us through our Twitters or our webpage, and you will see lots of updates on articles and blogs that are very important and interesting to follow up on the market. So we have quite a few questions and answers to share now with you, and we'll start with some of the questions and answer. So I'll ask David to be ready to do that with us. One of the first questions that comes from our participants is, does Carbon Consol Group sell offset credits? Yeah, we have that question asked for us, to us quite a few times. So what is your answer, David, on that, please?
Well, Carbon Consol Group, actually, we don't sell offset credits per se. We are in touch with the various project proponents. We are kind of market facilitators. We put project proponents and potential buyers into contacts, and we help organizations that we are consulting for to develop their cap and trade compliance strategy, be able to acquire those offsets and reduce their overall cost of compliance. But we are not a project proponents per se, and we're not the seller per se of those offsets.
Okay, very, very good. Another question comes from our participant. Are offsets traded at auction?
That's a good question. It's also frequently asked by various people that are in touch with us. Actually, no, the offset credits are not traded at auction. Auction is a mechanism that is used by the government solely to sell the regular allowances, as opposed to an offset credit, which is generated by a project proponent. So it's a totally different dynamic, a totally different mechanism to acquire them. You essentially need to be directly in touch with the proponent or a market intermediary that have access to those proponents. So that's essentially why we are always recommending to be as often as possible in touch with other market participants and offset project proponents also.
Very good. Third question we have here: what is the status of the lawsuit in California, and how does that or how does it affect us in Ontario, I guess?
Yeah, well, Jean, you did speak about it in your conclusion, I believe. So yeah, that was that lawsuit in California. It was aiming at disabling or dismantling the whole cap and trade program over there, which clearly would have had huge impact on the Quebec and potentially on the Ontario market as well. Essentially, that lawsuit was clearly one of the reason why Californian market participants pulled back and decided to not participate at the last auctions, leaving much of the allowances being made available for sale unsold at the 5 or 6 past auctions on their market. That lawsuit that was rejected once in 2016 by the Court of California was rejected for a second time by the Court of Appeal in California, which decided to uphold the California cap and trade program. And their decision is that the cap and trade program is here to stay and has been recognized as valid even under the constitution of the state. So there is still a potential that there might be an appeal at the Supreme Court of California to push further the situation, but we will know more about the intent of the pursuance probably at the end of the summer. So, as to the second part of the question, how does that affect us for the Ontario market? Well, one thing important to remind is that at this point in time, the California market and the Ontario market are two distinct markets. They are not linked yet. So, and we've been repeating this several times. Don't expect, or don't, at this point, do not plan your strategy based on an eventual linkage of the markets. It is likely to happen during the year 2018. And when that happens and that is officialized, you can readjust your strategy accordingly. But in the meantime, it is safe to assume that there are two distinct markets, and to plan your strategy only based on the reality of the Ontario market alone. So how does that affect what happened in California affect the Ontario market? It does give some feedback and some information on the market price, but again, and clearly the Ontario market participants have acted accordingly. It should not and haven't changed the way that participants are acting on the Ontario market. The last auction demonstrated it.
All right, very good, David. The last actually, we have two more questions here. Are offsets from Quebec, let me see if I can, or California, sorry, acceptable for Ontario compliance? So are offset credits from Quebec or California acceptable for Ontario compliance?
Well, Jean, pretty much the same answer to the last one. Just remind the two markets are different. So whatever's being made available on the California or Quebec market, they are not yet they are not yet valid under the Ontario cap and trade market. So are offsets from California and Quebec acceptable on the Ontario market? At this point, no. But again, they are likely to be when the two markets are become a single one or become linked in 2018. Then at that point, the offsets being generated in California or Quebec might be used for compliance purpose in the Ontario market.
Okay, thank you very much. And let's take a last question here. We'll finish on that. Are there more risk with offset allowances? Are there more risks with offset allowances?
Are there more risk with offset allowances? I guess the question that we mean here is it risky to acquire offset credits rather than solely allowances? Well, what you have to keep in mind, again, is that there's a limitation in the usage of offset credits for compliance purpose, and that limitation is equivalent to 8% of your total obligations for covering GHG emissions. So as an example, if you are an organization that is responsible for 100,000 tons of GHG emissions per year, essentially you can use offset credits to cover 8,000 tons of GHG emissions per year. So if that's the same amount yearly, well, for the first compliance period, which is 4 years, you will be able to use, 8,000 times 4 years, so 32,000 ton or 32,000 offset credits to cover your overall obligations regarding the cap and trade. So there is no more risk to you to use offset credits, at least in the way that the regulation has been developed in Ontario, as opposed to what it is in California, where where there is what we call a risk of reversal of the offset credits over there. And whenever an offset credit for some reason is declared invalid, even after they have been issued, then the owner of the credit is left with the shortage of an offset or a credit. So that happens, for example, when a forest project that has generated offset credits at some point in time, the forest is being burned by a wildfire. Then the offset credits that was obtained from the increased sequestration of carbon by the forest is then reversed, and that is what we call the risk of reversal. And the owner of the credits at that point in time has to give the credit back to the government, or the government will disable or destroy that offset credits from the account of the owner. So in that case, there is a risk, but the way that the Ontario market is being developed, that risk does not exist under that regulation.
All right, David. Well, that's about it for today. We, of course, have some other questions that will somehow come along as we finish our webinar. There's always other questions that are being added. We will answer them and forward them to your attention. Please take note that we have on our website access to our webinar download center. On that web page, you can download all the previous webinars we've had on the Cap and Trade series or other series that we have. You take also note that there will be next week again a forum, a Cap and Trade forum in Toronto. You have access on the website to that information, and you can apply by using also a promo code that will allow you to obtain a 20% discount for late registration. And we will be glad to follow up on any of your questions that you might have. So we invite you to also forward your questions to our attention at any time. And with that, we will leave you to enjoy in the last minutes of this webinar and the information we provided today, and invite you to take part in our next webinar, which will likely be in a month or month and a half's time. Thank you again for your participation, and we wish you a wonderful day.